Welcome to Small Biz Insider, a podcast from the Greater Houston Partnership where we highlight the innovative business owners, entrepreneurs, and leaders of the Greater Houston area making a big impact in the small business community. I'm Maggie Martin with the Greater Houston Partnership, your host for today. On this edition of Small Biz Insider, we're sitting down with David Tolson. He is managing partner at Arete Advisors, a full-service wealth management firm. David Tolson, welcome to Small Biz Insider.
Thank you very much.
Your career began in the energy and chemicals industries where you were involved in engineering operations and general management and business ownership. What prompted you to pursue a career in the financial services industry?
Well, yeah, thanks. It was really not a grand strategic design. It was really more of an incremental moving in that direction. My last real job, as I like to say, we did a lot of acquisitions. And so through that, I saw kind of the power from a strategic standpoint of using, understanding finance and capital markets and transactions to grow a business strategically. We sold that business to a competitor, and so I decided, instead of continuing a role in corporate America, just to start an advisory firm in the merger and acquisition area. And through that, we were helping small businesses raise capital, buy companies, sell companies. And over time, my focus continued to be strategy and finance to help businesses grow and improve the value of their firms.
And let's talk a little bit about the life cycle of a small business owner and the different stages through which a small business can perhaps expect to pass. Can you touch on maybe what could be the three most important parts in those stages?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to think about it. So most businesses, small businesses, are started by a founder with an idea about a product or service. So when you start a firm, you have a great idea. Maybe you've put your life savings into it or a substantial portion of it, but the firm at that point is really not worth anything. And so you're really scrambling around trying to figure out how to make that first sale and how to execute on that sale. And so that's a very chaotic time, a lot of risk and a lot of anxiety. And then if you do a few things right through that process over time, you'll hit a period of supernormal growth. And so the things you did early on to run that business can be very different than the things you need to do to manage the firm through that period of supernormal growth. And then that doesn't last forever due to competition, technology, saturation. That rate of growth doesn't last forever, and so you tend to hit a kind of a plateau. And so when you start reaching that plateau, then you have some decisions to make about how do I reinvent myself to have another leg up on the growth, or do I want to sell the business to somebody else that has a different vision about the firm?
At what stage do you see perhaps small businesses start to falter or even begin to fail?
You know, there's a lot talked about startup companies that fail, the failure rate of startup companies. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but I think where the real peril for businesses that get out of the chute is the way you run a $10 or $15 million company is very different than what you have to do to run a $5 million company. And there's several kind of plateaus in that. I think Michael Gerber maybe talked a lot about that in his book, The E-Myth. So that's one of the big things is that risk is, when you hit those plateaus is, as a manager and owner, are you willing or are you able to identify that and do what you need to do from an organizational standpoint to meet the requirements of the firm as they exist today, not as they existed when you started the firm?
What does a plateau look like?
Well, it can take on a variety of characteristics, but inability to deliver a product or service. You've made the sale, but you can't get it out the door, so to speak. Lack of controls, lack of communication, those are all symptoms of you've kind of outgrown the old mode of managing the business, and it's time to think about some new things.
What are the most important things do you think a business owner should focus on in the middle and the future planning stages? Once they get to those plateaus, what are those next steps?
Well, again, at the end of the day, the business needs to be very much not about the owner. So many businesses are, again, started with a founder and an idea, and they grow. They have the product knowledge. They have the vision about the product or the service. They have, in fact, the relationships with most of his clients. But to really be successful as a small firm, you have to transition out of that and eventually make the owner almost inconsequential, such that if he or she's not there, that the business goes on without missing a beat.
Do you think that's hard for some business owners to let go of?
Oh, it's very hard. It's very hard because it's your baby. You started it. You put your blood, sweat, and tears in it, your personal finances. You have the relationships. You kind of own it at your soul. And so that is among the biggest challenges that most small businesses have.
In terms of finances and finances for small businesses in particular, how can a business owner de-risk their personal finances?
Well, what I see, whether they're corporate folks or business owners, life gets busy, life gets hard, life gets chaotic. And what I see amongst most professionals is you're busy and you're focused on your job, whether it's the business you own or the job you're doing for a corporation. And so you may have an elegant, beautiful, robust business plan for your business, but your personal finances become kind of an afterthought. And there tends to be a focus on, well, what's this mutual fund doing, or what's this cost? But I believe, and what we tell all of our clients, is that your personal financial enterprise, if you will, deserves just as robust of a business plan as your business does.
I think it must be hard and sometimes become a common issue for business owners when they're starting out to have a hard time differentiating the two, because a lot of times it is their own capital that they're using to start up that small business.
Oh, very much. And that's what we see is it's in the lower middle market, small business, closely held firm. It's really difficult to see where the business stops and the owner starts as a person. And we work very hard to try to help them visualize that and to take strategic actions to separate those two.
Can you touch on succession planning and how business owners can do that successfully?
Yeah, when I first got out of college, my first boss, and probably every boss I had after that, would always advise me, if we're going to do this deal, or we're going to sign this contract, what's the exit strategy? What's the exit plan? Well, if that's true for a contract or a deal with a counterparty, it's even more true for a business. And, I talked to a lot of owners of, well, I'm not ready to retire. Well, that's good because, whether you want to be out of your business in 6 months, 2 years, or 20 years, I think it was Stephen Covey said, start with the end in mind and back up from there.
In your opinion, how can a business owner build and maintain the value?
Well, we do some work with our clients around drivers of value. And, a lot of owners are very, very unclear about what their business is worth. And it's natural to think that the value of my business is solely about net income. But the truth of the matter is there are other things that really affect how an outsider looking at your business will view value. And certainly net income is one of them. Growth in net income is another. But things like customer concentration, recurring revenue, are you a commodity or do you have a unique value proposition? What do your customers really think of you? Are they satisfied or are they raving fans? What's your back office look like? Does your accounting system really tell you anything? And can a banker or a potential investor look at your financial system and your financial reports and draw conclusions about how you run your business? Kind of a first cousin of that is, what do your contracts look like? What do your hiring processes look like? The professionalization of a firm that gives an outsider the idea that things are under control, decisions are made intentionally, and that when they look at their financial statement, they realize that it's pretty indicative of the business they're looking at. And then kind of the crown jewel of all that, again, is the management team. If I have a business and it's me and some helpers, then the business is really about me. And while that may generate a great lifestyle income for me in terms of transferable wealth, that's not a very valuable company. And so really the crown jewel is building out a management team that can run the business in your absence.
What does an ideal management team look like to you?
Well, the specifics really depend on the nature of the business you're in. But you need to have a visionary, somebody that gets the vision, where the company's headed and what that implies in terms of long-term goals, short-term goals, and intermediate goals. But then a lot of times visionaries are not great at execution. They kind of get bored with the details that it takes to grind out the day-to-day. And so understanding an organization from different roles and responsibilities and the nature of people of, I need a visionary, but I also need somebody that can make it happen. And usually it takes more make it happen types than it does visionaries.
Do you have an example of someone who either was a client of yours or someone that you've seen as an example of that's somebody who's part of a good management team?
Well, yeah, there's some great teams out there. I mean, my oldest son played college athletics, and one of his teammates' dads had a nice little business. And they were not close to where my son went to college, but they were at every game and then some. And, I got to know him quite a bit. And the only way he made it happen is because he could rely implicitly on his team to make things happen. I mean, he was engaged in the business, spent a little time on the phone, but it wasn't like, he had to miss his son's activities by being on the phone all the time back at the shop to make sure things happen.
Sometimes the person who's not the micromanager might actually be the best manager in some cases.
Absolutely. Hire right and turn them loose.
Let's talk a little bit about growth. What do you think of growth in general and what that looks like ideally when a small business is growing?
Well, again, that's kind of business business specific, but you start out with a core product in a core area, and you think about growth. The easiest thing to do is sell more to your existing clients, or sell more of the same product to similar clients in the same geographic region. But then when you saturate that, then you start thinking about, well, how do I step out? So then it could very well be, how do I sell the product or service I have to similar clients in a different geography? Or is there a way I can step out and offer additional products or add-on services to my existing client base? The hardest thing to do is offer a brand new product to a brand new client in a brand new geography. It's the hardest and the most risky.
Are there ways in which growth can actually be a downfall or a pitfall to some businesses?
Absolutely. It goes back to our earlier conversations in terms of, the way you run a $10 million company or a $20 million company is very different than the way you run a $5 million company. And so if you get traction, you're growing very, very rapidly, and you don't recognize that, you can find yourself kind of stuck in this chaotic mire, if you will, of trying to execute at 3 times the size of the business that you were a short period of time ago without the infrastructure and the management team and the controls and the processes to execute well.
In terms of other missteps or common pitfalls that small businesses can fall into, what are those?
I think, again, Stephen Covey, start with the end in mind and back over from there. I see an awful lot of owners that they like what they do. They don't have a big vision about what to do after this, and so they put off planning for that exit or that succession until they're emotionally ready to be out of the business. Well, time is your friend if you use it to your favor, but it can be your enemy if you wait too long. So that's one of the big pitfalls I see. Again, not to sound like a broken record, but again, a business that relies too much on the owner and not relying on a management team to execute is really a huge downfall.
So in terms of looking at these pitfalls and best way to avoid them, what are some of your tips?
Well, one of the things that I encourage our clients to do early is think about who their management team is and what they want out of that management team, and then make sure that the way they treat them, the way they incentivize them is consistent with what their expectations are as far as outcome and behavior. And if you do that well, then that helps you attract, retain, motivate, align, and reward those key folks.
You've mentioned a couple times, and I think this is important for small business owners to note as well, but it becomes very emotionally involving when you start a business and you're growing the business, because as you mentioned, this is for a lot of people their baby, their dream coming to realization. I imagine that sometimes you're not only a financial advisor for these small businesses, but also in some ways a personal coach as well. How do you help these small business owners realize the difference between that emotional attachment and what's best for the business?
We work very hard at trying to develop that relationship. We truly want to be that advisor for the client because they have lots of transactional help about a bank loan or about filing their taxes or about a lot of things. But we want to be the person that really understands what's going on in their heart and their head about what they want to do with their business now and in the future, how they think about their legacy, what do they want to do next. And so we spend a lot of time really working on that, trying to develop that personal relationship so they will open up to us because they have to know you, like you, and trust you before they're going to turn the keys of their kingdom over to you from an advice and a direction standpoint.
What are some good ways that, financial advisors such as yourself, but others who deal with small businesses can nurture that relationship?
Well, you have to view it as a marathon, not a sprint. It's a relationship, not a transaction. So you have to be willing to invest the time. And you have to be willing to spend the time asking questions that will lead you to those kinds of answers, as opposed to just being focused on the deal or the transaction.
We talked a little bit about the missteps that business owners can make in general, but specifically financially speaking, what are those biggest mistakes that small business owners can make when it comes to the finances?
Well, I think, big one's customer concentration. Again, a lot of businesses start with an idea and a product or service, and they work really hard to get that first sale, and they do a good job, and they deliver and they execute. and that customer buys more and more, and they're keeping them busy, and their capacity is tapped out serving that one or two customers. Well, from a cash flow standpoint, while that's working out well. But what I tell my clients is, you're one industry cycle, one corporate reorganization at your customer away from potentially losing that client. And so the idea of keeping customer concentration to a very manageable amount, maybe no one customer has more than 10 or 15% of your revenue is kind of not a bad rule of thumb. Now, for a startup company, that's not reality. It takes a while to get there, but you need to be very intentional about getting there. So that's a very large one. The other piece is, again, underestimating how much the business relies on you in terms of relationships and knowledge and product direction. That's so easy to do because you start a business and, it's incremental. And so that's kind of an insidious risk that you really have to be intentional about making sure that you get yourself out of that as soon as possible.
I want to talk a little bit, of course, about Houston in particular, and Houston being an ideal place for small businesses. In what ways do you think the Bayou City is a great place to not only start a business, but to stay here and to grow that business?
Yeah, I think I've been fortunate. I grew up in the Midwest in Indiana. Right out of college, I worked in Dallas for a while. I worked in Los Angeles. I've worked here. I've worked in Anchorage. I worked in another kind of Midwest town. And one of the things I think is unique about Houston is if you come here and you're honest and you work hard, everybody will give you a chance. That's not necessarily true in a couple of the other cities I've mentioned. It's kind of who you know there. But in Houston, if you'll put your boots on and go to work, people will give you a shot. And I really like that about Houston. I think that says a lot about the can-do entrepreneurial spirit that Houston has.
Are there financial aspects about Houston that you think make it an especially ideal city for small businesses?
Well, I think it's somewhat related to Houston, but it's Texas generally. Texas is a great place to do business. It's very pro-business. It's very low taxes. Houston in particular, we've got great transportation with highways and the port and the two airports. So I think there's a lot of things, geographically and infrastructure-wise, in addition to the environment from a tax and a government standpoint, that make Houston a great place to do business.
The Greater Houston Partnership, David, represents more than 1,000 companies in the Greater Houston region, 60% of which is made up of local small businesses. You've been a member of the Greater Houston Partnership for 2 years. What value have you found in being a member with the partnership?
I never cease to be amazed at the quality of the programs that the partnership puts on. There was a time where I was questioning whether I was getting value for my membership, and fate, if you will. I showed up at a big meeting thinking that the speaker might have something interesting to say, but in terms of gathering any business, it's probably a long shot. Well, as fate would have it, I sat at a table randomly with I guess probably 7 other people, and 2 of those people are now my clients. So don't judge a book by its cover.
I'm so glad it's worked out for you.
Very much so.
David Tolson, Managing Partner at Arete Advisors, thank you for joining us on this edition of Small Biz Insider and sharing your story and experience with the partnership.
Thank you very much.
And we look forward to you joining us on the next Small Biz Insider. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast so you never miss an episode. You can do so by visiting the Small Biz Matters page on houston.org. There you'll also find interviews and additional small business resources. Houston.org is where you can stay up to date with partnership events, networking opportunities, and community impact initiatives. Thanks again for joining us today on Small Biz Insider. Until next time, I'm Maggie Martin, encouraging you to engage with the partnership as we work together to make Houston greater.